She was just a little girl, curled up on the cold kitchen floor, clutching her stomach as tears ran down her face. Her voice was weak, trembling. "It hurts so bad." When officers arrived, they found not food, not comfort, but an empty fridge, a confused grandmother, and a child who had been fed pet food to survive. At her side, a German shepherd pressed close, refusing to leave her, guiding rescuers to the truth hidden inside that dark house. What unfolded next would test not only the strength of the police, but the conscience of an entire community. If this happened in your town, would anyone step forward? Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? The town of Cedar Ridge, Pennsylvania, was quiet that night, the kind of silence where even the wind hesitated. At 10:47 p.m., the dispatcher's call broke it. A neighbor reports a child crying inside 1432 Sycamore Street. Officer Ethan Walker, age 38, steered his cruiser down the familiar road. Ethan was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair trimmed short and the faint gray of early years at his temples. A thin scar angled across his chin, an old memory from a fight he didn't choose. His face carried a weight of patience, the kind earned after mistakes that had once cost lives. In the back seat sat Atlas, his 6-year-old German shepherd partner. Atlas was large but graceful, his black and tan coat gleaming even in the dim streetlight. A faint scar marked his flank, but his amber eyes glowed steady and calm. The dog had the alert posture of a soldier, yet the softness of a guardian who knew when to bow low for a frightened child. They pulled up to the Carter home. The porch sagged, the number 1432 crooked on the beam. Mrs. Patel, the neighbor who had called, stood at the gate clutching her coat. "I heard a little girl," she whispered, eyes wide. "She sounded like she was begging." Ethan nodded, his voice gentle. "Thank you, ma'am. We'll handle it." The front door creaked open under his knock. The air inside was heavy with a sour, fishy smell. The living room was cluttered, but it was the kitchen that caught Atlas's nose. He pulled forward, paws firm on the tile. On the table, a half-open can of cat food, spoon beside it, the metal edge shining dull. The refrigerator hummed weakly. Ethan swept his flashlight slowly across the room. Atlas gave a low bark, then placed his paw on the lower cabinet door, scratching once. His tail held straight. Not aggression, but signal. Ethan bent, the light following. There, under the table, Mia Carter, age 9. Her small frame was curled tight, knees pulled to her chest, arms around a faded teddy bear. Her blonde hair clung damp to her forehead, her eyes swollen from crying. The beam revealed her belly distended, taut against the thin fabric of her shirt. "Mia?" Ethan said softly, lowering himself until his eyes were level with hers. "My name's Ethan. This is Atlas. We're here to help." Atlas lowered himself too, sprawling on the floor, muzzle to the tile. He didn't touch her. He simply waited, tail thumping once. Slowly, Mia's hand loosened from the bear and slid into the thick fur of his neck. Behind them came a fragile voice. Evelyn Carter, 78, shuffled into the light. She was small and bent, hair a cloud of silver, eyes unfocused with the fog of memory. Her housecoat hung loose, the blue flowers on the fabric faded with years. She blinked at Ethan, then looked at the girl. "Elizabeth?" she asked softly, smiling with recognition that didn't quite fit. "That's Mia, ma'am," Ethan said carefully. Evelyn nodded absently, then touched the cat food can on the table. "I gave her supper," she said with certainty. "If the cat can eat it, then a child can too." The word struck Ethan harder than a shout. He glanced at Mia, still trembling beneath the table, her small fingers buried in Atlas's fur. The German shepherd didn't move, just breathed steady, as if offering his heartbeat for her to borrow. Ethan pressed his radio, voice low but firm. "Dispatch, this is Officer Walker. Confirm address 1432 Sycamore. I've got a minor in need of immediate medical assistance. Send EMS. Child is conscious, abdominal distress. Repeat urgent response." In the silence that followed, the kitchen seemed to breathe with him. The drip of a faucet, the hum of the refrigerator, and the faint scrape of a child's whispered sob. The first bell had rung in Cedar Ridge that night, and it came from a dark kitchen where a little girl's hunger had been mistaken for supper. The kitchen of 1432 Sycamore Street was small, square, and suffocating. Ethan Walker's flashlight beam cut through shadows that clung to every corner, The air was thick with the sour tang of spoiled milk, and something metallic like rust mingled with old canned food. He pushed open the refrigerator door with a cautious hand. Inside, shelves sagged empty. A single bottle of curdled milk leaned sideways, its cap crusted white. Beside it sat a jar of pickles, liquid evaporated halfway, and nothing else. No bread, no fruit, no leftovers. Nothing a child should live on. Atlas, the German shepherd, sniffed around the counters. His ears twitched at every drip of the faucet, his movements steady but alert. He nudged a stack of greasy bowls with his nose. They clattered against each other, porcelain stained with old tomato sauce. Utensils clumped together like they had been abandoned mid-meal. From beneath the table, Mia's small voice broke the silence. "They forget sometimes," she whispered. Her blue eyes glistened in the dim light, her small hands still gripping the tattered teddy bear. "Grandma forgets to cook, and when I'm really hungry, she tells me to eat the cans." Ethan knelt closer, his broad frame shadowing the girl from the harsh beam of the flashlight. His heart sank. "What cans, sweetheart?" His voice was low, careful, like he was speaking to a wild bird afraid to flee. Mia hesitated, then lifted her chin toward the table. The half-open can of cat food gleamed back at him. The label's cartoon cat smiled mockingly in the dark. "I eat those sometimes," she admitted. "If cats can eat it, then I can too, right?" The words were fragile but sharp enough to cut through Ethan's chest. He opened his mouth but found no answer. Instead, Atlas moved first. The dog shuffled closer, lowering himself until his warm flank pressed gently against Mia's side. He didn't bark, didn't whine, he just curled himself like a shield, resting his head across her lap. Mia's breathing steadied. She buried her face in the shepherd's thick fur, muffling a sob. For the first time since Ethan arrived, the trembling in her shoulders slowed. Atlas, patient and steady, became her living blanket. Ethan turned his head, swallowing hard before he spoke into his radio. "This is Officer Walker. Confirm priority status. I need EMS at 1432 Sycamore immediately. Possible malnutrition, child in distress. Request a backup from CPS, Child Protective Services. Repeat, CPS required." The dispatcher's reply crackled through. "Copy that, Officer Walker. EMS en route, CPS notified. ETA, 10 minutes. Behind him, a shuffle of slippers dragged across the linoleum. Evelyn Carter, 78 years old, shuffled back into the doorway. Her body was frail, posture stooped, shoulders hunched forward as though years had pressed her into that shape. Her once straight auburn hair was now a silver cloud, uncombed and wild, catching light in uneven strands. Her eyes carried the haze of dementia, cloudy, unfocused, yet sometimes startlingly clear before drifting again. She clutched the frame of the door with wrinkled hands spotted from age, knuckles swollen with arthritis. "She's fine," Evelyn murmured, her voice a strange mixture of kindness and confusion. "Elizabeth is always fine." Ethan looked at her carefully. "Ma'am, this is Mia." But Evelyn shook her head, smiling faintly at the girl under the table. "No, that's Elizabeth," she said, a certainty in her tone. "My daughter, always such a picky eater." Mia stiffened at the words, her eyes darting toward Ethan for confirmation. He gave her a soft nod, not contradicting Evelyn further. He had learned long ago that with people lost in dementia, correction often meant chaos. Instead, he asked gently, "Mrs. Carter, do you usually make dinner for Mia?" Evelyn's eyes wandered to the counter, then the open fridge. She frowned, confused. "She eats what's here. I gave her supper." "That's enough, isn't it? Children need to learn not to be wasteful." Her words were not cruel. They were fragments of another time, another reality where her mind still believed she was caring for her child as she once had. Ethan felt the weight of the truth settle on his shoulders. This was not neglect born of malice. It was neglect born of fading memory, and that made it no less dangerous. He looked back at Mia. Her face was pale, framed by strands of tangled blonde hair. She had the kind of smallness that came not from youth alone, but from being underfed. Her stomach, though distended from poor nutrition, was matched by thin wrists and collarbones that jutted too sharply for a 9-year-old. Atlas gave a quiet rumble deep in his chest, leaning heavier against her. His brown eyes flicked up at Ethan as if to say, She needs us now. Ethan stood, his broad figure filling the kitchen. He spoke into his radio again, this time his tone firm with urgency. Dispatch Officer Walker. Confirm EMS Priority 1. Child is in immediate danger due to malnutrition and unsafe living conditions. Request expedited CPS officer on site. He switched the radio off and crouched again, his hand brushing the top of Atlas's head. The shepherd's ears perked slightly, but he didn't move away from Mia. You did the right thing calling out, Ethan told the girl softly. You're safe now. Atlas and I will stay with you until help gets here. Her lip trembled. She pressed her face into the shepherd's fur again. Promise? Ethan nodded. Promise. The faucet dripped once. The refrigerator groaned. Evelyn shuffled back to her chair in the living room, humming a lullaby to someone only she could see. And in that dim kitchen, Ethan understood this wasn't just a rescue. This was the beginning of something much larger, something that would demand every ounce of patience, strength, and humanity he still carried. The fluorescent lights of Cedar Ridge General Hospital flickered faintly as Ethan pushed the emergency gurney through double doors. Mia lay curled under a thin blanket, her eyes wide open but unfocused, clutching her worn teddy bear against her chest. Atlas trotted close at Ethan's side, leash slack, his thick coat brushing the gurney as though unwilling to let the child out of reach. Nurses rushed forward. The first was Nurse Caroline Price, a woman in her early 40s with a kind face lined by long shifts. Her tall, slender frame moved with brisk efficiency, auburn hair pulled back into a bun, and freckles dotted across her fair skin. She pressed 2 fingers to Mia's wrist, murmuring in a soothing voice. Pulse elevated, but steady. Let's get her inside. Mia flinched at the stranger's touch. Atlas stepped half a pace forward, ears pricked, but Ethan laid a calming hand on his shoulder. Easy, boy. They're here to help. The gurney was wheeled into a small room painted in dull cream. Machines hummed, the scent of disinfectant mixing with the sharp chill of recycled air. A chart was clipped to the wall, ready for the attending physician. Moments later, Dr. Marcus Chen entered. He was in his late 30s, with an angular jaw softened by the weariness of long nights on call. His black hair, streaked faintly with early gray at the temples, was cropped short. Behind rectangular glasses, his dark eyes carried both precision and compassion. He had grown up the son of immigrants who had struggled with poverty, and it showed in the way he always listened first, before speaking and he had learned the weight of being overlooked. Dr. Chen pulled a chair close to Mia's bed and spoke gently, his baritone calm and deliberate. Hi there, sweetheart. My name's Dr. Chen. I'm going to help your stomach feel better. Can you tell me where it hurts the most? Mia pointed weakly to her lower belly. It keeps jumping. Like something's inside. Her voice quivered, echoing the terror she had carried from that dark kitchen. Ethan glanced at Dr. Chen, who only nodded and placed the stethoscope carefully against Mia's abdomen. He listened for a long moment. What you're feeling, he said finally, is your body reacting to something it shouldn't have had to eat. But you are not sick with any strange disease, and you're not going to have a baby. Do you understand? It's just your stomach protesting. Relief rippled across Ethan's chest. The rumors swirling in the dark corners of town would not be allowed to consume this child's truth. Mia blinked at him, hesitant. So, I'm not bad? I won't get in trouble? Dr. Chen shook his head firmly. No, Mia, you're not bad. Your body just needs real food, real rest. That's all. Atlas whined softly, resting his massive head on Mia's small hand. The weight steadied her trembling fingers. She buried her face briefly in his fur, drawing strength from the warmth. Nurse Caroline adjusted the IV drip, inserting a line with practiced ease. Mia winced, but Atlas pressed closer until her eyes relaxed again. Caroline smiled faintly. That dog's better than half the sedatives in this place. Ethan allowed himself a rare smile. He's been trained for comfort as much as protection. Atlas knows when someone needs him. Outside the room, muffled voices rose snippets of curiosity from staff who had already heard distorted versions of the story. Pregnant child, strange illness, haunted house. Ethan's jaw tightened. He knew too well how rumors spread faster than facts. He stepped into the hall, his boots striking the linoleum with quiet force. A woman stood waiting. CPS officer. Sarah Mitchell, mid-30s, was of medium height with a sturdy frame that suggested steadiness more than speed. Her curly dark brown hair was cropped to her shoulders, framing a round face marked by serious hazel eyes. She wore a gray blazer over a simple blouse, and though her clothes were neat, they bore the faint wrinkles of someone who drove straight from home without pause. Sarah extended a hand. "Officer Walker, CPS caseworker assigned tonight." Ethan shook it firmly. Her grip was strong, her tone professional, but not cold. "Mia Carter, 9 years old. Malnutrition, unsafe home environment. Grandmother present but showing cognitive decline. I want this handled with discretion." Sarah nodded, pulling out a small notepad. "Understood. I'll begin assessment. Priority is Mia's safety." She glanced into the room, softening at the sight of Atlas pressed against the child. "Looks like she already trusts someone tonight." "She trusts him," Ethan said. "And right now, that might be the only reason she's calm." When they stepped back inside, Dr. Chen had finished his notes. He stood with his arms folded, expression grim but gentle. Diagnosis: acute digestive distress caused by ingestion of non-human food products. Malnutrition evident. She needs IV fluids, monitoring, and meals suitable for recovery. No sign of pregnancy. No infectious disease. She'll stay overnight. Sarah scribbled quickly. "And the grandmother?" "Evelyn Carter," Ethan replied. 78, dementia. She believes Mia is her daughter Elizabeth Long deceased. She isn't cruel, but she's forgetting to feed her, confusing reality. Sarah's brow tightened. Then Mia's safety at home cannot be guaranteed. Ethan crossed his arms, shoulders broad, his face shadowed by the overhead light. He had carried similar cases before, but rarely with a child so small, so fragile. Which is why she's not going back there, not tonight. Maybe not ever. Mia stirred on the bed, murmuring in half-sleep. Atlas shifted, lowering his body fully onto the floor beside her, his head still draped across her arm. His slow breathing became her rhythm. Nurse Caroline slipped in quietly and placed a small silver bell on the nightstand. Its chime was delicate, barely audible when she tested it with a fingertip. She smiled at Mia. "If you need anyone, nurse, doctor, or even your dog, you ring this, and we'll come running." Mia reached out timidly, brushed the bell with her finger. The soft sound rang out. Atlas lifted his ears, as if he had already promised he would answer before anyone else. Ethan exhaled, tension easing just slightly. He turned to Sarah. "I need her in a private room. No gawkers, no rumors feeding into this. Seal off the hall if you have to." Sarah met his gaze, unwavering. "I'll make the call. She deserves dignity." Dr. Chen added, "She also deserves peace, and a meal that isn't from a can with a cartoon cat on the label." The bell chimed again softly as Mia's eyes fluttered closed, her small hand still resting against Atlas's fur. For the first time in hours, the shadows seemed to lift. Yet beyond the hospital walls, the storm of whispers had already begun. The morning sun barely touched Main Street, Cedar Ridge, before whispers began crawling through the town like ivy. At the bakery, an old woman leaned over her coffee and muttered, "I heard the child's belly was swollen pregnant at 9. At the post office, a clerk shook his head. No, it's something supernatural, kicking inside her stomach, they say." By noon, the story had twisted itself into half a dozen shapes, each crueler and more fantastical than the last. The truth that a little girl had eaten cat food because her grandmother forgot how to feed her was too quiet to compete. The Maple Diner, owned by Gus Thompson, was where those whispers boiled over. Gus was 63, built broad and sturdy like the oak trees that lined Cedar Ridge. His beard, salt and pepper but thick, framed a face carved with decades of laughter and hardship. His blue eyes, however, carried a stormy sharpness. They belonged to a man who had seen too many people suffer in silence. Gus had lost his only son in a factory accident 20 years ago, a wound that never closed. Since then, his diner had become both his refuge and his pulpit, a place where he demanded decency from those who entered. The diner buzzed with the clatter of forks and murmurs of speculation. A man in a ball cap leaned back in his chair, voice dripping with gossip. "They say she's carrying some kind of creature, like a curse." A younger waitress, Megan Rivera, petite with chestnut hair pulled into a ponytail, looked uneasy as she poured coffee. Her olive-toned skin flushed as she whispered, "She's just a child. Why would you say that?" The man shrugged, smirking. "Just repeating what everyone's saying." That was when Gus slammed his palm against the counter. The room froze. Cups rattled. A spoon clinked to the floor. He stood tall, towering over the gossipers, his voice thunderous. "Enough. That girl isn't cursed, and she damn well isn't pregnant. She's starving. She had to eat cat food because we, this town, turned our heads." Silence swallowed the diner. Even the grill hiss seemed quieter. Gus grabbed a piece of chalk from beside the register and pulled the large menu board off the wall. His hand, calloused and broad, moved with surprising swiftness as he scrawled across the black surface. 5 p.m., Repair House 1432, Sycamore. Bring milk, rice, food. He turned, chalk dust clinging to his fingers. "We fix her home. We fill her fridge. We show that girl she belongs in a town that gives a damn." From the doorway came the sound of nails tapping against the wooden floor. Atlas stepped in, tall and noble, his sable coat gleaming under the fluorescent lights. His amber eyes swept the room with quiet authority. Behind him followed Ethan Walker, broad-shouldered and stern, his uniform still creased from the night before. The sight silenced even the boldest whisperers. Atlas padded to Ethan's side, sat tall, and looked across the room as if daring anyone to call the rumors truth. The diner breathed as one. The story was no longer gossip. It was reality. Gus pointed to Ethan, his voice lowering but firm. "Here's the man who found her, and here's the dog who guarded her. You think this is some fairy tale? Ask them." Ethan's jaw flexed. He scanned the faces, neighbors, friends, people he'd sworn to protect. What I saw at 1432, Sycamore was not a ghost. It was a hungry little girl hiding in a kitchen that smelled like spoiled cat food. She's in the hospital now, safe. But she won't stay safe unless we do something real. Rumors don't feed a child. Atlas gave a single sharp bark, the sound reverberating like a gavel striking. Heads bowed, shame replacing curiosity. At a corner booth, Martha Klein, a retired schoolteacher in her 70s with silver hair tucked neatly under a scarf, rose slowly. Her thin frame trembled, but her voice did not. "I have boxes of dried noodles and powdered milk. I'll bring them." From the back, Tommy Caldwell, a burly mechanic with grease-stained hands, added, "Got shingles and nails in my truck. That roof leaks, I'll patch it." Megan, the waitress, set her order pad down. "I'll paint the window frames. I don't have money, but I can do that." One by one, voices rose. Offers stacked like bricks meals, repairs, blankets, even children's books. The diner had shifted from rumor mill to rallying hall. Gus wiped the board clean again, this time writing names. Martha, dry goods. Tommy, shingles, nails. Megan, paint. Gus, soup and bread. Each name etched itself into the board like a pledge. Ethan stood silently. Atlas pressed close against his leg. The dog's presence alone seemed to hold the crowd steady, a guardian in fur. Ethan knew the town needed this moment, not just for Mia, but for themselves. They had to prove that decency still lived here. The man in the ball cap who had started the rumor stared at his coffee, cheeks burning. "I've got coils of wire. Outlets in an old house are dangerous. I'll fix them for free." Gus nodded, not smiling, but satisfied. "Then you'll be there at 5. The bell over the diner door jingled as people began to leave, some to fetch supplies, others simply to spread word of the gathering. The rumor that had poisoned the morning was being reshaped into action. Ethan exhaled slowly, tension loosening in his shoulders. He looked down at Atlas, who was watching the departing crowd with calm, steady eyes. "We've done enough damage by silence," Ethan murmured. "Now it's time to build." Atlas pressed his muzzle briefly to Ethan's hand as if to agree. By mid-afternoon, the chalkboard by Gus's counter was full, nearly 24 names, each with a task. The diner smelled of strong coffee and resolve. No one spoke of curses anymore. They spoke of lumber, soup, paint, and milk. At 5 o'clock sharp, Cedar Ridge would gather, and this time, the story would not be about whispers, but about hands that chose to work. The courthouse of Cedar Ridge was a modest red brick building that had seen decades of disputes, reconciliations, and quiet verdicts. That morning, the chamber carried a weight heavier than usual, not a crime of theft or violence, but the fragile fate of a 9-year-old girl who had been found hiding in her own kitchen. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly above, but on the judge's desk glowed a warmer halo from a brass lamp, its shade yellowed with time. That single lamp gave the hearing its name among those who would remember it. The session under the yellow light. At the bench sat Judge Martha Wilson, a woman in her early 60s with silver hair swept into a neat bun. Her face was stern, but not cruel, a mixture of sharp cheekbones and kind eyes framed by oval glasses. She had grown up in Cedar Ridge, once the daughter of a coal miner, and carried into her courtroom a reputation for being unflinching with lies, yet merciful with truth. Her years on the bench had not hardened her completely. Every case involving children had left its mark like rings inside a tree. Mia Carter sat small in the front row, her knees tucked together, a teddy bear clutched tight against her chest. Her brown hair, tangled but brushed back as best as the nurses could manage, caught the light. Atlas lay stretched at her feet, his large frame curled protectively near her shoes, ears pricked, eyes scanning the room. The sight of the German shepherd in a courtroom was unusual, but Judge Wilson had allowed it. "If he steadies the child," she said, "he stays." The first to speak was Dr. Alan Chen, a physician in his late 40s with square glasses and a clean-shaven face that carried lines of fatigue from too many night shifts. His tall frame and slightly stooped posture revealed a man who gave more to his patients than he ever saved for himself. He cleared his throat and faced the judge. "Your Honor, when Mia was brought to the hospital, she presented with severe gastrointestinal distress. She had consumed cat food repeatedly over days. There was no evidence of pregnancy, no internal parasite, no hidden condition. The swelling was her young body reacting to improper nutrition." He glanced at Mia, then back at the judge, his voice tightening. "She has survived not out of care, but in spite of neglect, though unintentional, born of her grandmother's illness." Next came Diana Foster, principal of Cedar Ridge Elementary. Diana was in her early 50s, tall and slender, with blonde hair streaked with gray. She carried herself with a composure that came from years of shepherding restless children down crowded hallways. Her expression was soft, but her voice was clear. "Mia is punctual at school. Always clean though, clearly underfed. She rarely eats lunch, often says she's saving it for her grandmother. She never asked for help. She's a quiet, responsible child, afraid of being a burden." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Wilson raised her hand for silence. Then it was Officer Ethan Walker's turn. He stepped forward, broad-shouldered in his Navy uniform, his dark hair cropped short. His jaw bore the shadow of stubble, and his gray-blue eyes carried the weight of what he had witnessed. He had been a police officer for nearly 2 decades, shaped by a car accident years ago, in which he had failed to save a young boy, a scar that made him fierce in every call involving a child since. "Your Honor," he said, his deep voice steady but heavy, "when I entered 1432 Sycamore, the air reeked of spoiled food." The refrigerator was empty, except for cans gnawed open. Mia was under the kitchen table, hugging a toy, stomach bloated. Her grandmother, Evelyn Carter, was in the living room, mistaking Mia for her dead daughter. It wasn't malice, it was confusion, dementia. But confusion doesn't fill a child's stomach. His hand rested briefly on Atlas's head. "If not for Atlas, we may not have found her so quickly. He guided me straight to her. He hasn't left her side since." The judge nodded gravely. "The court acknowledges the service of Officer Walker and Atlas." At last, a soft voice rose from the benches. Ellie Graham stood. She was in her late 60s, short with a frame that seemed fragile yet resilient. Her back slightly bent from years of teaching and gardening. Her silver hair was cut simply, tucked behind her ears, and her face bore fine wrinkles that deepened when she smiled. She had once taught preschool in Cedar Ridge, known for her patience and her gentle ability to calm even the most stubborn toddler with a story or a song. She stepped forward with measured steps, a worn shawl draped around her shoulders. Her voice was quiet, but carried to every corner of the room. "I was Mia's preschool teacher. I live alone, in a small house with a spare room. I have time, I have warmth, and I have patience. I may not have riches, but I can cook meals, take her to school, and keep her company. I ask the court to grant me temporary guardianship." Judge Wilson's eyes softened. "Mrs. Graham, Do you understand the full responsibility? Medical, educational, emotional care. All will fall on you. Ellie did not flinch. I do, and I accept it as though she were my own child. The courtroom fell still. Then, unexpectedly, Mia's small voice cut through. She had stood, her teddy bear clutched so tightly that it seemed strained. Her voice trembled but rang clear. I want to live with Miss Ellie, because when I call, she comes back. I don't want to be alone anymore. A hush blanketed the room. Atlas lifted his head and pressed his muzzle gently against Mia's small hand, as though affirming her words. The gesture was silent but undeniable, a living testament to loyalty. Judge Wilson leaned forward, her glasses catching the yellow lamp's glow. She let the silence stretch, then spoke firmly. Based on the testimony of medical professionals, school staff, law enforcement, and the expressed wishes of the child, the court grants temporary guardianship of Mia Carter to Mrs. Ellie Graham, effective immediately. Evelyn Carter shall be transferred to the Cedar Ridge Memory Care Center for full evaluation. The Department of Child Protective Services will oversee the arrangement for 3 months. Her gavel struck wood, a sound both sharp and liberating. Ellie turned, her hands trembling as Mia rushed into her embrace. The teddy bear was squashed between them, Atlas rising to stand guard at their side. For the first time in weeks, Mia's smile wasn't fragile. It was whole, and under the yellow glow of that aging lamp, Cedar Ridge took its first step toward healing. The small cottage on Willow Lane looked nothing like the courthouse, the hospital, or the dark kitchen of Sycamore Street. Its white siding had faded in patches, and ivy crept lazily along the brick chimney. But when Mia stepped inside for the first time, holding Ellie Graham's hand, she was met not with silence, but with the smell of something baking yeast and warmth, as if the house itself exhaled welcome. Ellie's home was modest. Worn quilts hung over the sofa, faded photographs lined the mantel, and potted herbs filled the windowsills. But it was clean, cared for, and full of quiet kindness. At the foot of Mia's new bed sat a small nightstand. On top of it, polished until it gleamed, was the silver bell Nurse Caroline had given her at the hospital. Ellie placed it there with gentle hands. "This," Ellie said, smoothing the quilt, "is your voice for the nights you feel alone. If you ring, I'll come, always." Mia touched the bell with one finger. It chimed softly, a delicate note that echoed through the room. Atlas pricked his ears from the doorway. The German shepherd was already making the threshold his post. The room, for the first time in Mia's life, didn't feel like a hiding place. It felt like hers. That evening, Ellie made dinner. She bustled around the kitchen, her shawl slipping from one shoulder, her silver hair falling loose. She hummed as she cooked, chopping carrots, stirring broth, sliding thick slices of bread into the oven. The table was set with 3 bowls of chicken soup, steam rising in comforting spirals. Beside them lay golden slices of toasted bread, crisped at the edges and brushed with butter. Ethan Walker arrived just as the bread was served. He looked out of place in his uniform inside Ellie's warm little kitchen, his tall frame filling the doorway. Yet his tired eyes softened when he saw Mia already seated, her teddy bear placed carefully on a chair beside her. "Smells good," he said, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. Ellie chuckled. "Sit down, officer. No one leaves my house hungry." Atlas had already claimed his spot under the table. As the bowls were passed around, the shepherd's nose twitched, nostrils full of roasted chicken and warm bread. His tail thumped softly against the floor. Mia giggled for the first time in weeks when Atlas crept his nose toward her lap, begging silently for a taste. She tore off a corner of bread and held it out. Ethan started to object, but Ellie waved him off. "One crumb won't hurt," she said. "Besides, that dog has earned more than one supper." The bread vanished in one gulp. Mia laughed again, the sound light, unfamiliar, but unmistakably hers. Dinner passed in gentle conversation. Ellie told stories of when she taught preschool, how Mia once painted the same paper 3 times because she couldn't decide on the right shade of blue for the sky. Ethan shared a lighter story of Atlas getting tangled in Christmas lights during a K-9 demonstration. Mia listened, eyes wide, smiling into her soup. Later that week, Sarah Mitchell from CPS arrived for her first in-home visit. Sarah, mid-30s, had curly dark brown hair and hazel eyes that seemed always to weigh the truth behind a person's words. She wore a navy cardigan and slacks, her clipboard tucked under one arm. She walked through each room carefully, noting the tidy bed, the stocked pantry, the small bell gleaming on Mia's nightstand. Her expression, often guarded, softened when Mia ran her hand along Atlas's back and whispered, "This time, when I ring, someone really comes." Sarah crouched, eye level with Mia. "Do you feel safe here?" Mia nodded firmly, teddy bear squeezed tight. Atlas rested his head on her knee like punctuation to the answer. Sarah smiled faintly, jotting her notes. "That's all I needed to hear." Not every moment was easy. There were nights Mia woke sweating, heart pounding, stomach twisting with phantom hunger. But when she panicked, her hand shot toward the bell. Its chime rang through the house. Within seconds, Ellie was at her side, sitting on the edge of the bed, brushing damp hair from her forehead. Atlas always came first, muzzle pressed to her hand, steady breath telling her she wasn't alone. When her breathing slowed, when her fingers unclenched from the sheets, she whispered, "Thank you." And Ellie would kiss her temple, answering softly, "Always." By the second week, Mia's cheeks had color. She laughed at Atlas's antics when he tried to balance a toy ball on his nose and sneezed it across the room, when he sprawled across the rug like a furry rug himself. Ethan visited often, bringing books from the police station's lost and found, a puzzle box, even an old baseball cap that Mia immediately made Atlas wear. Ellie's kitchen became the center of the house's warmth. The smell of toasted bread lingered most evenings, mixing with soup, stew, or baked apples. For Mia, food was no longer fear, it was safety. She ate slowly, savoring every bite as if learning anew what meals were meant to be. And always, Atlas was near. When she grew anxious, his muzzle found her hand, grounding her with the simplest of gestures. When she laughed, his tail wagged like he understood every joke. When she slept, he lay across her door like a silent sentinel. One Sunday morning, Ethan leaned against the fence outside Ellie's cottage, sipping coffee from a paper cup. Sarah Mitchell joined him, her clipboard under her arm. "She's stronger," Sarah said, nodding toward the window where Mia's small silhouette passed with a plate. Ethan followed her gaze. "She's learning that, when she calls out, someone comes." Sarah glanced at him, then at Atlas lounging in the yard, sun warming his black saddle coat. "And sometimes, it's not even someone. It's him." Atlas raised his head as if he understood, ears swiveling at the sound of his name. Then he stretched out, paws wide, and went back to watching the house. For Mia, life under Ellie's roof was not perfect, but it was safe. The silver bell was her lifeline, the smell of toasted bread her anchor, and Atlas, her constant shadow, her shield. From a trembling girl curled under a dark kitchen table, she was becoming something else entirely, a child who could laugh, call for help, and know without doubt that someone would answer. Autumn came early to Cedar Ridge that year. The trees on the hills rolled into copper and amber, and the air carried that crisp bite that promised frost by dawn. For the first time in months, the house at 1432 Sycamore Street stood with its windows open, curtains flapping like flags of surrender, finally replaced with flags of welcome. The community had answered Gus Thompson's chalkboard call. They came in boots and flannel, arms filled with hammers, nails, paint cans, loaves of bread, and bags of rice. The scent of sawdust and fresh paint drifted across the yard, mingling with the sweetness of ripening apples from the orchard behind the house. Mia Carter, her thin frame filling out now with steady meals, stood in the orchard with a basket in her hands. Her brown hair gleamed in the sunlight, her smile no longer shy but ready, as if she had discovered something rare: safety. Beside her, Ellie Graham, her shawl wrapped tight against the breeze, lifted another apple from the branch. Ellie's silver hair glowed like frost in the afternoon light, and her hands, lined with years of chalk and gardening soil, were steady as ever. "You pick the ones that fall easy," Ellie told her. "The tree tells you which are ready." Mia stretched on tiptoe, tugging gently until a bright red apple dropped into her basket. She laughed, a sound light and free. At the edge of the orchard, under the largest apple tree, Atlas sprawled like a watchful sentinel. His black and tan coat gleamed, his ears flicking at every sound, amber eyes fixed on Mia. When she moved, his gaze followed, a silent promise that distance meant nothing. He was hers to the end. In the yard, neighbors worked shoulder to shoulder. Tommy Caldwell, the mechanic with grease-stained hands and a barrel chest, hoisted new shingles onto the roof. His beard, thick and dark, was flecked with paint, but his grin never faded. "Roof's tighter than a drum now," he called, hammer striking rhythm. Beside him, Martha Klein, the retired teacher with silver hair tucked under a scarf, painted the window trim sky blue. Her brush strokes were careful, her lips pressed in focus. "Every child deserves a house that smiles," she murmured. Gus Thompson himself, broad-shouldered and bearded, supervised the delivery of a new refrigerator. His booming voice carried across the yard. "No child in this town eats from a cat's can again, not on my watch." Inside, Megan Rivera, the petite waitress from the diner, wiped flour from her apron as she slid trays of rolls into Ellie's oven. The smell of yeast rose, filling every room with the fragrance of belonging. Even Sarah Mitchell from CPS stopped by in casual clothes jeans and a cardigan, her clipboard absent for once. She leaned against the porch railing, her curly hair catching the sunlight, hazel eyes softer than Mia had ever seen. She didn't come to inspect, only to watch, and to bear witness to what the town had chosen to become. As the afternoon waned, the baskets filled with apples. Ellie sliced a few into wedges, their juice running sweet and sticky down her hands. Mia handed them out to neighbors with shy pride. "For you," she told Tommy, offering a slice. "Best payment I've ever had," he chuckled, wiping his brow. "To you," she said to Martha, who kissed her forehead before taking the wedge. "And to you, little one," Martha answered warmly. Atlas rose and patted over, nudging Mia's elbow. She laughed and pressed an apple wedge to his nose. He sniffed, sneezed once at the tartness, then licked her cheek instead. The crowd roared with laughter, even Ethan, who had just arrived, leaning against his cruiser with his arms crossed, smiling despite himself. Ethan Walker Tall, scarred, steady watched as the girl he'd first seen trembling under a kitchen table now moved through her community with light in her step. His dark hair caught the sun, his uniform sleeves rolled up. Atlas bounded to him, tail wagging, but quickly circled back to Mia, unwilling to let her out of sight. "You've done well," Sarah told Ethan quietly as she passed him on the porch. Ethan shook his head. "Not me, them, the whole town, Ellie, and that dog." His voice softened. "Especially that dog." As twilight drew in, Ellie lit lanterns along the porch, their glow golden against the autumn dusk. The townsfolk gathered around long wooden tables set in the yard. Bowls of soup steamed, baskets of bread sat warm, and jugs of cider glistened with condensation. Mia sat between Ellie and Atlas, her shoulders no longer hunched, her laughter ringing clear. Judge Martha Wilson, who had stopped by after her day at court, raised a glass of cider. Her silver hair gleamed in the lantern light. "This town has known whispers, but tonight let us be remembered for hands, not tongues, for a girl who rang a bell and found a family." The crowd murmured in agreement, glasses raised. Mia's cheeks flushed pink. She turned to Ellie. "Is this what family feels like?" Ellie pressed a kiss to her temple. "Yes, child. Family isn't just who you're born to. It's who shows up, who stays when you're weakest." Atlas pressed his muzzle into Mia's small hand again, amber eyes unwavering. To her, he was more than a dog. He was proof that loyalty could be silent, yet louder than any rumor. The night deepened, filled with the clink of glasses, the smell of apples baking, and the sound of laughter echoing under the apple trees. When Mia finally lay down in her bed at Ellie's house, the silver bell waited on her nightstand, Atlas stationed at her door. She didn't ring it that night, not because she feared no one would come, but because, for the first time, she didn't need to. The house smelled faintly of toasted bread. Outside, the orchard whispered with the wind. Inside, a little girl knew the truth. Family was not just blood. Family was those who chose to stay. In Cedar Ridge, a hungry little girl, a weary officer, and a loyal dog reminded us of something eternal. Miracles don't always come with lightning in the sky or angels in robes. Sometimes they arrive in the form of neighbors carrying bread, a teacher offering an empty room, or a faithful dog refusing to leave a child's side. Mia's story is not only hers, it is ours. Because in every town, in every street, there is someone waiting for an answer when they ring their bell in the dark. And God, in His mysterious way, often answers through us, through our hands, our voices, our choice to show up. So, Tonight, may we take this lesson into our daily lives, to look around us, to notice the hungry, the lonely, the forgotten, and to become the miracle they are praying for. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone you love. Leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the light in our world. And may the Lord bless you and your family, keeping your home filled with bread, laughter, and the steadfast loyalty of love.